No, it's not closing. How much money?
Folks, let's go. Let's go.
It would take a lot of time.
So we were right here when we finished yesterday. We had discovered the concept of action or no action. All right, so let's examine another historical situation. In the 70s, we had a series of what were called oil shocks, and those preceded the Arab oil embargo, which you may have studied in U.S. history. In the period from 1973 to 75, oil prices went up more than double in just 2 years. So what happened on the curve, or what happened on the graph when that happens? What changed? When oil prices more than doubled. Supply changed where? How? It did shift to the left pretty significantly, okay? So that meant that price level did what?
Increase.
And GDP?
Decrease.
And unemployment? Rose. Good, okay? Then from 78 to 80, oil prices went up less than the rate of inflation. Unemployment decreased significantly, and real GDP grew by 16%. And policymakers had done nothing. The economy corrected itself. They don't always have to do something. GDP grew by 16%. 1 point. Real GDP grew by 16%. From 75 to 78, real GDP grew by 16% in the period in between these columns.
Oh, okay.
75 to 78. In between these columns, real GDP grew by 16%. So the economy fixed itself without policy intervention. Okay? Then, when things were starting to get better, the revolution in Iran happened. Anybody know what year that was? 79. It's the revolution in Iran. Okay? Oil prices rose again. So again, short-run aggregate supply shifts to the left. Price level goes up. GDP goes down, and unemployment goes up.
Wait,
Okay.
Why did GDP
Just wait.
go?
Just wait.
Okay.
That's not an annual rate. That's the GDP over that entire period. And so you had some residual growth from the period preceding. Then the oil shock hits in 79. Okay, so we'd been rising at a monumental rate in between in those 3 years. So 2.9% relative to what had happened just before is actually pretty bad.
Didn't we have something like this a couple of years ago? Where there was an oil storm?
Where there was what?
Like they stopped putting oil in the market?
We've not had another oil embargo, but we have had OPEC cutting back supplies in Venezuela then after Chavez died.
A couple of years ago, like $4 beyond.
Yes, but that wasn't necessarily all related to a decrease in supply of oil. Okay. So this guy is important. You'll see his name at least once on the AP exam. He wrote a book, The General Theory of Employment, Interest, and Money. Fascinating, huh? Yeah. In that book, though, he argued that recessions and depressions result from inadequate demand and that policymakers should do things that shift aggregate demand. Okay? He was not a classicist, and he critiqued classical theory. He said, the long run is a misleading guide to current affairs. In the long run, we are all dead. So Keynes viewed the long run as way long. And he said that anything we're living in is the short run. Okay. Economists set themselves too easy, too useless a task if in tempestuous seasons they can only tell us when the storm is long past, the ocean will be flat. If all the economists are going to say is it'll get better in the long run, then they do us no good, is what Keynes was saying. He said, you gotta take some action. And yet, we just looked at an instance where the government took no action and things recovered. So this is evidence to you that while we say economics is a social science, it is far more speculation and study of the past than its ability to predict the future is. Okay? And there's always going to be disagreements and debate. Always. Even the best economists out there today argue and debate and discuss. And still don't reach concrete conclusions. All right. So we've gone over a lot in this chapter. Let's take some time as we go through this conclusion. If you intend to study for the test or the quiz, you might want to make some notes of these concepts so that you know concretely what it is you need to study. Aggregate demand and aggregate supply. And what that graph looks like. You want to know how aggregate demand and aggregate supply explain economic fluctuations. Remember, they don't cause those fluctuations, but by graphing them, we can understand what's going on in the economy. Know that when we look at the SRAS and the LRAS, we're trying to relate the now to the later and the overall. Okay? And that what we learned in this chapter, while similar to what we've learned before, stands kind of separate. Remember that some of the rules are changed. Okay? Next chapter is critical. We're going to put this stuff together with fiscal policy and monetary policy. And of everything we've studied so far, this next chapter will explain to you, at least in the United States, how the world works. Because fiscal policy and monetary policy is all about the actions that Congress can take. We've already been through money supply and what the Federal Reserve can do. Now we're going to talk about Congress's role in the economy next chapter. And it will be eye-opening for you and make you really want to ask some good questions come election season. Okay? All right. Everything short run is irregular and unpredictable. And if anybody tells you that they can predict it, they're lying. Nobody's crystal ball actually works. If they make a prediction and it happens, they just got lucky. Economists are about as effective at predicting the economic future as meteorologists are at predicting the weather a week out. Sometimes they're right, and sometimes they're not. Anybody can predict the weather for tomorrow. We use the ASAD model to analyze economic fluctuations. Remember that list of reasons why aggregate demand slopes downward. Those three factors that cause it to slope downward. The wealth effect, the interest rate effect, and the exchange rate effect.
Which one's the misperception?
Misperceptions is later. It fits with sticky wages and sticky prices. Okay.
How big is our test room stuff? You know how many questions?
That is indeterminate as yet. I have not even created the Word file.
At least 50.
50 points? Oh, probably more. Probably more. It's a big chapter. The tests kind of correlate in size. Expect more short answer this chapter than you usually see. Probably fewer multiple choice and more short answer. Okay, remember the things that can shift AD. Anything that shifts consumption, investment, net exports, or government spending. Bless you. Remember that LRAS is vertical because no matter what the price level, output is what output is in the long run. And remember the factors that determine output. And we kind of started this semester with the things that determine output. H and K and L, right? Human capital, labor, natural resources, technology. And those things are the reason why output is what output is going to be. And when we talked about the short run aggregate supply curve, we had to discuss why it slopes upward. And we talked about how when the price level is different than what we expect it to be, output changes. Because business either becomes more or less profitable, and so production increases or decreases. And here, Andrew, is where we talked about those reasons why. The sticky wage theory, the sticky price theory, and the misconceptions theory. That goes with that positive slope of the SRAS. And then we talked about what can make the SRAS change. And remember, this is that one big exception. A change in the price level can cause SRAS to change. Or anything that changes long run aggregate demand. Or, I'm sorry, long run aggregate supply, the vertical curve. We talked about, too fast?
Yeah.
Okay.
Is there such a thing as long-term demand?
No, because demand is much less constant. So demand is very much related to the individual, even when we're looking at it as an aggregate. One day Justin Bieber is the bomb, and the next day he's trash. Okay, people are fickle. Tastes and preferences change very much. And even though some things move in large blocks, like as baby boomers age, demand for certain things is going to change significantly. It's not as tied to the concrete things like supply is. When we're talking about labor, you've got the number of people you got. When we talk about natural resources, what's there is there. About the only thing that fluctuates much in terms of those inputs would be technology. And even then, even though we've seen the rate of technology increase, it's still, in the grand scope of things, pretty plodding. Okay, economic fluctuations are caused when aggregate demand or aggregate supply shift. When those change, and we see the change in price level and the change in output, then that's when we end up messing with unemployment, and those are the things that help us gauge economic fluctuations. And we talked about how when those shift, how eventually over time they adjust back. And we did a practice time and we did a few examples where we actually graphed it out and talked about when this shifts, what changes, how do we adjust and get back to that long run aggregate supply. Okay, and that's essentially what this last bullet says. Price level may change in the long run, but we're always going to kind of get back to that long run aggregate supply vertical curve. Output's going to come back to its natural rate.
Is that the thing we did on the board?
Yes. Okay. And then this one, the stagflation one that we hit kind of at the end of class yesterday. Aggregate supply decreases, output decreases, and yet prices are going up. That is stagflation. Because remember, everything tells us rising prices equals rising output. And so when we move in contravention to that, that's where we're in that stagflation. And if you hear newscasters or economists saying stagflation, know that there are some folks who deal with the economy who are getting kind of panicky when you get into a stagflation period, because something significant has to change to pop us out of that. But again, in the long run, the wages don't stay sticky and the prices don't stay sticky, and people adjust their misperceptions.